Hello there. Okay, so I guess before we begin the lecture, yesterday Stanley died. That's sad. Okay. Anyway, on with today's lecture, which is about Ruth Stirton's The Lay Patient and Genetic Illness. Okay. Basically, what the what Stirton's saying here is that uh, a phenomenological approach to genetic illness and genetic testing is a good thing. She observes that a phenomenological approach will allow for a more comprehensive understanding of the patient's illness. The fundamental claim is that the greater understanding of a genetic illness, i.e., its effects on the patients, will factor into the creation of better normative principles. Okay, that's it. Okay, 49 seconds, we're done. No, not done. The details of the argument. Basically, she starts off with saying, well, what should your rights be as a patient to know about any genetic illnesses you have. So, like, this is sort of like the question is, like, do you want to know if you're going to die? It's sort of analogous to that question. But basically, one answer is yes, you should know about your genetics. You have a right to know. And guess what the other answer is? No, you shouldn't have a right to know. And now both of these arguments, I detail them a bit in the handout. They're fraught. There seems to be no consensus on either of this. On one hand, people are saying, yes, you should have an absolute right to know. And then on the other hand, people are saying, no, you shouldn't. And the arguments, there's no decisive argument one way or another. Stirton says, look at phenomenology will give you a decisive answer to this question. And the decisive answer is what phenomenology says, basically. Look, if you want to know, you should be able to know. But you should not have this knowledge foisted upon you, thrust upon you if you don't want it. And why is this phenomenological? It's sensitive to your own life situation, the patient's own circumstances and what they're going through, and their own needs and desires. It's not some abstract rule simply applied regardless of the desires of the patient. So it is sensitive to the patient's needs, and this is seen by Stirton as phenomenological. And you know what? It is phenomenological. So the phenomenological answer to do you have a right to know about your genetics? The answer is for phenomenologists, yes, if you want to know. Okay. Next section of the paper. Okay. Genetic discrimination, it's a thing, it's shitty, don't do it. That's basically the takeaway from the next major part of the chapter. I'm not going to give you any sort of argument about why discrimination is wrong. Hopefully you know that. If you don't know that, well, you just gotta know that. Discrimination is wrong. Don't discriminate based on genetics. What is perhaps interesting is all the ways that in an American context discrimination about genetic information can happen. Like, basically, if your employer knows they're funding your health care in America, so they might fire you, right? Because it's going to be way more healthcare costs. In America, in the American context, an insurance company might discriminate against you based on knowledge of your genetic information, i.e., in the form of a pre-existing condition or something along these lines. Stirton argues that this is just horrendous and it should never happen, and it's a moral failing to discriminate against someone based on genetic information, any information you might have about their genetics. Okay. Now, the final section of the paper, or of the lecture. What you might be wondering is the phenomenological connection. Like, why is this phenomenology? Okay. The main phenomenologist, the guy who first started the ball rolling, who created phenomenology, was Edmund Husserl. He was a German philosopher. I visited his archive twice in Belgium. and it's amazing. Basically, his fundamental claim is like, look at hitherto before him, problems, abstract philosophical problems were just that. They were abstract. They didn't seem to have any involvement with life itself. They did not involve the first person experience of the person who exists. And phenomenology's attempt is to say, look, we must involve the first person, the subject, the I, and their problems in any philosophical considerations whatsoever. That's Husserl. Merleau-Ponty, a French phenomenologist, much later, well, not much later, 50 years later, we'll say, made this strong case that an adequate account of the person necessarily must involve that person's body. A person is not some rational I, a person is an embodied consciousness. Your individuality, your subjectivity, your encounter with the world is essential in any sort of medical ethics scenario. We must take account of that. So what does phenomenology have to say about genetic illness? The next claim is, look at doctors and healthcare professionals must be willing to engage in a conversation with patients who have genetic predispositions to illness, and these conversations must not merely be the conveying of information like, okay, yeah, you might develop this particular condition at some point in your life. It's also discussions about how that patient deals with that knowledge. Coming up with life plans and treatment plans that really explore these options and lay it out for the patient. Don't just give the diagnosis and then walk away and it's like, yeah, okay, so you might develop terminal cancer at some point. Live as you may. No, that's not it. Phenomenology says that this discussion that you have with patients is an essential part of their health. So the takeaways from this chapter are twofold. One, do not discriminate against patients because they have a predisposition to a medical illness. In fact, that is morally wrong. A person has a right to know that about their illnesses, but this knowledge is ultimately the person's own decision if they want it. And you have to be sensitive to their needs and desires given their position in life. The second hugely important claim is doctors, healthcare professionals must engage in discussions with patients about their diagnoses of genetic illness, if the patient wants, and have some sort of robust discussion about it. Like, okay, so you now know this, here's what this might entail, and here's how we can help to cope with this and address any concerns raised by this. So two normative claims. One, that a patient has the right to know based on whatever they think, based on their desire to know. Two, a patient and a doctor should engage in discussions about genetic predispositions to illness. And that's all for today, folks. The discussion question is up on Blackboard, and the handout's up on Blackboard. I hope you're enjoying the class. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.